While the Buddha was in Isipatana, a young man named Yasa, who was the son of a millionaire of Vras, one day suddenly grew tired of his family and of his lustful life with many women. He ran away from home secretly and happened to meet the Buddha on his way. After hearing the Buddha teach and learning the benefit of the Dhamma practice, he rejoiced and requested permission to leave home and practice with the Buddha. On the same day, Yasa's father, in search of his son, met the Buddha and asked him about his son. The Buddha instructed him on appropriate points of the Dhamma, causing him to understand. He felt happy and allowed his son to leave home and become a monk. After hearing the Buddha's teaching, the rich man was very happy. He also took refuge in the Buddha Dhamma, and expressed his wish to be a Buddhist lay follower and follow the Buddha Dhamma. He then invited the Buddha and Yasa to his home on the next morning for lunch. Later, 4 of the best friends of Yasa also left home and became Buddhist bhikkhus, and later led 50 young men of noble families to also become Buddhist bhikkhus. Without the need of the Buddha's supervision, they all learned and practiced diligently, and before long, they had all attained the stage of arahant. When the Buddha had 60 bhikkhus as his disciples, he held a meeting directing the bhikkhus to propagate the Dhamma. The Buddha said, "Bhikkhus, I have been released from all the bondage of mankind and devas, and you have been released also. Go and spread the Dhamma to other places, to give more people the opportunity to gain freedom from suffering. Spread the Dhamma so that human lives may be purified and brightened. There are people in the world who have little craving. These are people ready for the Dhamma, and they will be able to understand it. I myself will go out to teach at Yeruvala."
After the Buddha had sent out, for the first time, 60 of his arahant disciples to teach at various places, he left Isipatana and traveled toward Magadha in the southeast and finally arrived at Yeruvala village. He took up residence at the place of the Nodhair cult, a group of 1,000 people, the leaders of whom were the 3 Kassapa brothers. In order to break through their wrong views completely, the Buddha explained to their leaders basics of the Buddha Dhamma which he had recently realized. After hearing the Buddha's teaching, they all were full of joy and made a request to leave home to become Buddhist monks. The 3 Kassapa brothers and the 1,000 followers all became arahants later. Then the Buddha took his arahant disciples and went to Rajagaha to fulfill his promise to King Bimbisara to teach and enlighten the people of Magadha. Upon arriving at Rajagaha, Buddha and his disciples stayed at Palm Garden. With a fully compassionate heart, he taught in various ways to make King Bimbisara and his people understand the Dhamma. They then expressed their wish to be the Buddha's disciples. King Bimbisara told the Buddha that when he was a crown prince, he had a wish that besides being a king he would also be, someday, the first among all kings to hear the teaching of the Buddha. Now all his wishes had been realized, and so he decided to take refuge in the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha and formally become Upasaka, i.e. a Buddhist follower at home. Later he offered to donate Bhavana, a park and a bamboo grove, to the Buddha as a residence for the bhikkhus. Hence Sovanna became the first monastery in Buddhist history. One morning, on his way from Bhavana to Rajagaha to beg for his daily ration of food, the Buddha encountered a youth who was wet through and through, looking as if he had just got out from water. The young man stood in the middle of the road and bowed one after the other to the east, south, west, and north.
Then he raised his head and saluted the sky, and at last knelt down and saluted the earth. Then he threw grain in all the directions he had saluted. The Buddha watched the youth finishing his strange ritual in the thoroughfare, and asked him why he did all these things. The youth replied that he observed that according to the directions that his father had given him before he died, and that the purpose of performing this ritual every morning was to prevent any evil thing happening to him from any direction. After hearing his answer, the Buddha said to the youth, "It is very good that you can honestly follow your father's instructions. But the real meaning of your father's instructions and the ritual he wished you to observe is quite other than what you think. Your father told you to salute the east and spread grain. What he really meant was that you should respect and support those who have shown great kindness to you, that is, your parents. By saluting the south, you should understand that your father wanted you to respect and treat your teachers well. Saluting the west means loving and protecting your wife and children. Saluting the north means honoring your friends and relatives. By saluting the sky above, your father meant that you should pay respect to monks, Brahmas and saints. To salute the earth below means treating all with kindness and compassion, not only people, but also animals. Your father had all this in mind, so he told you to salute in this manner, to prevent evil from happening to you from any direction. The Buddha then explained to the youth, whose name was Sagala, what one should do for himself and others in order to bring happiness and a better life to everybody now and in the future. The Buddha also instructed Sagala not to kill, not to steal, not to commit adultery, not to lie, and not to use any intoxicant, that is, he gave him the well-known 5 precepts.
Afterwards, the Buddha advised Sagala to work and earn his living diligently, to take good care of the wealth he would accumulate, and at the same time not be greedy, and to use his wealth not only for his own benefit, but for others as well. The Buddha instructed him to divide his money into 4 portions. 1 part should be used for the support of his family, 1 part for the expansion of his business, 1 part to help the poor and the needy people of society, and the remaining part should be saved for any emergency. Sagala listened respectfully to the Buddha's instruction and later requested the Buddha to accept him as a disciple. For the rest of his life he saluted the 6 directions in the manner and with the understanding that the Buddha had taught him. During the Buddha's stay near Rajagaha, there was a well-known master of one of the unorthodox schools living in the area. He had about 200 students, and among them Upatissa and Kalita were the most learned. However, they were not satisfied with what their teacher had taught them. They hoped to learn the deeper knowledge about life after death, and about freedom from suffering. They were the best of friends, and their education and knowledge were on the same level. So they made an agreement that each would try his best with his intelligence and training to search for the highest knowledge, and that as soon as one had found it, he would immediately share it with the other. One morning, as Upatissa was walking along the road towards Rajagaha, he saw a monk with a food bowl. The monk looked so radiant and peaceful, even when he was begging for food, that Upatissa was very much astonished. The nearer he approached to the monk, the more he wondered about him, because he looked so peaceful it appeared that this monk was free from all fear.
Upatissa thought, this monk must have found the ultimate truth that we are pursuing, or he must be, at least, a disciple of one who has found the ultimate truth. I am anxious to know who his master is, and what his master teaches. I must follow him, I must find the truth. But Upatissa felt that it was not appropriate to question him while he was begging for food, so he followed him at a distance until he had finished his daily begging and had left the city of Rajagaha. Then he came forward, respectfully gave his regards as if he were talking to an old acquaintance, and then asked him, Venerable Master, you look so peaceful that I would really like to know who your teacher is. Under whose direction did you leave home and take up the pure life? What is the name of your teacher, and what did he teach you? The monk answered smilingly, Venerable Master, let me tell you that there is a great sage of the Sakya clan, who gave up his throne and left home to practice pure living. I left my home also to practice with this great monk. The Buddha is my teacher, and I practice according to his teaching. Upatissa thought that perhaps he could learn the truth about life, which he and Kalita had been seeking for a long time, from this great monk. So he asked anxiously, Venerable Master, what is this teaching of the Buddha? What has your master taught you? I would very much like to know. The monk answered in a mild tone, It has not been a very long time since I left home to learn and practice with the Buddha. So, I have not learned very much about the Buddha's teaching, and I am not able to explain it to you fully in detail. But if you would like to know only the general content of his teaching, I could tell you about it in a few sentences. Upatissa replied hastily, I would very much like to know. Please tell me just the general contents. The monk said, Fine, now listen.
The Buddha often said that all things arise from causes and all things also cease as a result of causes. The Buddha also explained those causes. As Upatissa heard those words, he immediately understood their meaning. He realized that whatever arises will also pass away, and attain the first stage of enlightenment. Upatissa then thanked the monk deeply and asked him where he might find the Buddha. Feeling very happy, he then left, intending to pass the good news on to Kalita, that he himself had already realized the universal truth, Dhamma, they seeked. Now Upatissa's face was glowing with happiness, just like the face of the monk who had told him the truth about the universal law of cause and effect. When Kalita saw him coming, He immediately knew that his friend had realized something special, so he asked, "My friend, just look at the glow on your face. You must have found the truth which we have been searching for, have you?" Upatissa answered joyfully, "Yes, yes, my friend, I have realized the Dhamma beyond suffering." Kalita asked eagerly, "How did you do it, my friend, how did you do it?" Upatissa told his friend Kalita about the remarkable monk he had met and repeated to him the words he had heard. Instantly, Kalita also understood the monk's teaching and attained the first stage of enlightenment. Finally, the two of them went to see the Buddha and asked him to accept them as bhikkhus. Later on, they became fully enlightened arahants and the Buddha's chief disciples. They were known everywhere for their great wisdom and great supernatural power under the more familiar names of Sarita and Moggallana. The monk who told them the Dhamma about the universal law of cause and effect was Bhikkhu Assaji, and the verse that was handed down became known as the verse of the Bhikkhu Assaji. When the Buddha was residing at Rajagaha, a conference was held at Sovanna for all the disciples on the full moon day of the third month, Khmer era, of the year.
The meeting was initiated by the simultaneous return of the 1,250 Arahant disciples from their respective Dhamma propagating missions. Since they had not contacted each other and yet had arrived on the same day to report their accomplishments to the Buddha, it was indeed a most unusual occasion and pleased the Buddha as well as his disciples very much. The Buddha felt that this occasion was a proper time for instruction, so he gathered all his disciples together at Sovanna and instructed them to practice and teach following the same basic principles. The essence of this teaching was, 1. Do not do anything bad. 2. Do good. And 3. Purify your mind from defilements. There are 4 important things to remember about the occasion of this gathering. These are, 1. All the attending disciples were arahants. 2. All these arahant disciples were bhikkhus ordained by the Buddha personally. 3. These 1,250 arahant disciples did not make previous appointments to arrive on the same day. And 4. The Buddha's instruction given on that day became known as the Patimokkha instruction. To celebrate these 4 memorable facts or events, Theravada Buddhists have celebrated the Dhamma-respecting festival every year on the full moon day of the third month ever since that first conference was held. When King Suddhodana found that his crown prince had attained supreme enlightenment and become Buddha and that he was staying at Rajagaha, he sent a young official named Kudian, one of the playmates from Siddhartha's youth, to invite him to Kapilavatthu. He wished he could see the Buddha once more while he was living. To fulfill his father's wish, the Buddha promised to visit him, and so, at the suitable time, he and his disciples went to Kapilavatthu. One evening the Buddha and his disciples arrived to Kapilavatthu. For the night they stayed at Nigrada Garden, outside the city, where King Suddhodana had provided residence for them.
The next morning, as he did every day, the Buddha led his disciples through the streets of the city to beg for food. People watched them marching along and someone went to report that to the king. King Suddhodana was both surprised and angered to hear that the prince was begging for food from his own people. King Suddhodana ordered his driver to rush him to the street where the Buddha was begging. On arriving, he saw the Buddha and his disciples marching along with their bowls already full of food. They were making their way through a crowd who were paying them respect, and they were just about to turn towards the palace. But King Suddhodana was angry and disappointed at the prince begging for food in his own country. In his own country, the crown prince was entitled to take anything he wanted without asking for permission at all. So the king, looking at the situation in this way, naturally felt quite irritated. King Suddhodana went before the Buddha and reproached him in a tone of disappointment and indignation. "My son, is this the good news that I, your father, am to receive? You have abandoned your father and left the country. You are the son of the king, but has the heir to the throne yet been decided, O my son? Today you have done the most disgraceful thing to your father and the royal family. On what occasion have your ancestors ever done such thing? On what occasion have we ever accepted food like beggars?" The Buddha spoke calmly to his angry, non-comprehending father. "Father, this is done, in reality, according to the custom of my ancestors." King Suddhodana answered, "Everybody knows that your ancestors were kings and that none of them ever did such shameful things." The Buddha continued calmly, "Father, it is true, but I am not talking about worldly ancestors. Now I am perpetuating the tradition of all the Buddhas of the past. I mean that I am now the Buddha, and in begging I do what all of my ancestors have done."